Hello and welcome to episode 2 of Brief Encounters, Law School and Beyond. Firstly, thank you so much, listeners, for your positive and enthusiastic response. Today, we introduce Mr. Pushkar, a distinguished Indian qualified advocate currently based in Washington, D.C. Sir boasts an impressive academic background, having graduated as a Merit Scholar from Georgetown University's LLM program, where he specialized in international arbitration and dispute resolution. His extensive experience includes serving as a case manager at the Mumbai Center for International Arbitration and counsel in various commercial litigation and arbitration disputes in India. He also holds a law degree from Christ University and a postgraduate diploma in alternative dispute resolution from NALSAR University. We are delighted to have Pushkar sir to share his expertise and insights on international law and dispute resolution, and we look forward to an enlightening discussion. Good evening, sir. Welcome to Project LLM's podcast. You are our second distinguished guest for this podcast series. And so before we dive into the more formal questions, LinkedIn as a platform was quite new to me when I joined college. It was something our seniors introduced us to, and they said that this is how you get internships, you network and you connect on LinkedIn. But I wanted to ask you, what is a LinkedIn influencer and how did you end up becoming one?
Well, thanks very much, Ria, for your kind, invitation. And, I'm delighted to be, being interviewed at this podcast. And it's always a delight to share information and, perhaps learn from each other. But that being said, sure, you're right about how LinkedIn is the go-to place for all the younger generation and even perhaps senior ones as well. But as a lawyer, I thought, I need to stand out and, I want to, connect with people. And I think, having gone to a couple of law firms abroad, I realized that, this would be a good opportunity for me to, update my profile and, include everything that I had in my CV. That way I could, demonstrate what my, achievements are. But that being said, I must say that I'm not a LinkedIn influencer, even though I intend to, share information and also at the same time create content which will help people who are similarly placed as me or someone who's starting out fresh new to get some sort of access to data and information. So that way, I could not be well placed as an influencer, but I would be happy to, share more about, how I went through about my LinkedIn stories.
That's amazing. I mean, for a younger generation just starting out, you are an influencer in my eyes, I would say. Getting any sort of information that would help us in this legal world is a big help for us. So moving on to the academic journey, what were the factors that motivated you to pursue a foreign legal education? Was it always in the cards?
Well, it wasn't always on the cards. My plan was to, go back to litigation because I'd done multiple internships in law school, and I thought litigation would be what I'd be doing, post my LLB in Bangalore. And I thought criminal litigation to a bit of constitutional law elements in High Court would be a good opportunity. And I was always fascinated with environmental law as well. So I thought maybe that would be, and at the time, Bangalore NGT matters and the National Green Tribunal were increasing. So I thought that is a very good opportunity for me. I'm sorry, the NGT was based in Chennai, and many of the cases involving Bangalore and Karnataka were being discussed in Karnataka High Court. And I thought that is a cool way for me to enter into the profession. But I realized somewhere down the lane, after having done a couple of international moves and having exposure to arbitration via conference and also by the WIS mode, I realized that going abroad at some point in time makes sense if at all I want to focus my career on this profession. And I spoke to many of my mentors and many of the people whom I met in Vienna and even in London. And many of them advised me that, look, this is a good time for me to explore opportunities abroad. But I just didn't know where exactly I would be doing and what I would be doing. But I was sure by the end of my law school, the fifth year, that I will be doing my at some point. But I just didn't know, especially because of the ongoing COVID at the time. It was still uncertain about many factors. Though I'd applied to Georgetown at the time, and I had the offer letter, I just didn't know whether that's the right time or not. And eventually I did in 2023.
Right. So it was a culmination of a lot of experiences that led to international arbitration as being the subject that you narrowed down on finally. But was there a particular reason for Georgetown University specifically?
Couple of reasons, to be honest. One amongst which is during COVID days, I had undertaken a training program which was facilitated by Georgetown, ILI, and World Bank Exit. And I thought doing that training program for 3 to 4 months was like a really good eye opener for me. And I thought if I have to do my LLM, it would be at Georgetown. Now,
Right.
that being said, I already applied to Georgetown, but yeah, I just was not sure about whether Georgetown is the place where I have to be. Because eventually I did apply to MITS Geneva, and I was fortunate to get an admission offer letter from there. And I was dabbling between whether, going to Europe makes better sense or coming to Washington, D.C. And my family was also based in Virginia. And that way it was more of a personal choice of coming to the US. That being said, I also knew that coming to the US would also give me opportunities to perhaps sit for the New York bar, which I would have now done. And I thought that would be a good, advantage over MITS Geneva. Though, from what I've understood, for many opening opportunities or entry level positions, going to Europe makes sense. And many people have landed positions in Paris, in Brussels, and many other places in Europe, including in Germany and in Switzerland, of course. So that way it was more of a personal choice. But I zeroed down on Georgetown also because of its extensive course offering on investor state disputes and arbitration. In short, we call it ISDS. And I was sure that after I've done this mode in commercial arbitration, I undertook a couple of research projects in investor state arbitration, and I was sure that public international law with a mixture of ISDS is what I would want to focus on. And that, I looked around, on the university websites, their course offerings, and I saw that Georgetown has the largest offering in terms of courses and opportunities to, extern in the spring semester, either with, Exit at the World Bank or with many law firms in and around Washington, D.C., who have a dedicated ISDS practice groups. So these were like culmination of factors which led me to choose Georgetown.
Right, right. You have mentioned how important the moot events were for you and how much they impacted your journey to Georgetown University. So let's go back to your undergrad days for a little while. How did you experience at Christ University prepare you for your LLM studies? And while you're answering that question, if you could weigh on the NLU versus non-NLU debate, did that impact your UG studies or your foreign studies in any way?
Well, the second one is quite controversial. I'll not directly poke in there. But my experience at Christ, even though people have differing views on how important your undergraduate studies are, I think, it was quite formative for me. And I'm grateful for Christ University for making, opportunities available for me at the right time. And also as an interested, candidate in international dispute resolution, I undertook the WIS mode as I was telling you about, and I was fortunate to get good amount of resources. And we had a couple of alumni who had done this mode before. But there I think is where, I understood that I need to broaden my horizon and, do an LLM as well, because at some point you need to build a community of like-minded people. Even though international arbitration is still fancy and was still fancy at the time, there were very few people who were actually in the profession from Christ University. But I knew some of them were quite helpful in making my decisions or giving me information to make an informed choice. I think that's where I think the NLU versus non-NLU debate, becomes much more relevant. Not that, schools which are not NLU are not on the same par. It's just that the alumni, databases and, the outreach network will only make it better, for those who want to go abroad and perhaps who want to, dive into international arbitration as a practice group. I think NLUs do have, to some extent, a competitive advantage. But that being said, if there is an interested and a motivated candidate, I wouldn't say just myself, but I'm sure there are many others at various non-NLU schools. I'm sure they will find a pathway to break into this profession. And I would still not call myself for breaking in, but I'm still in the process of breaking in. So I'm sure just being a non-NLU, or even in fact, you could include non-general law graduate, would still have equal opportunities if one makes up their mind to crack into this profession. It's just that the access to information is not symmetrical, and that makes it, quite unfair. But that being said, in today's age of AI and whatnot, there's still opportunities for everybody on a level playing field.
Yeah.
It's just how committed one is to make sure that they crack into this profession.
Yeah. That's quite, I think that would be quite comforting to hear for a lot of law students, because the constant NLU versus non-NLU debate is something that goes on a lot. And being from an NLU, I can say that the competition is so high that at the end of the day, it does not matter where you come from. It just matters how you present yourself to a particular job or to a particular opportunity or an initiative, and how you go about it. So I would say, like you correctly stated, it's very important who you are as a person and how much you want something, how far would you want to go to achieve it. So I definitely agree with you on that portion. Now,
just to follow up very quickly on that, I think one of the other reasons, I'll follow up with exactly what you said, but the reason why Georgetown and many of the US schools are quite appealing is because of the peer competition and peer pressure.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't mean to say on a negative context, but more on the lines of, that keeps you motivated. And I think NLUs, and to a large extent even Jindal, does have that environment where, if someone is doing something interesting, there is a natural urge for someone to undertake an interesting project on different scope and object. And this is where I think, many of the US schools, when one is deciding to go about, we look at, okay, what is the kind of practitioners or students who will come and undertake studies. I think Georgetown, being based in Washington, D.C., has the right blend of many former government lawyers or current government lawyers in their respective countries who come and do the LLM. And for someone like me who's interested in public international law and ISDS, this is one of the biggest reason why I thought Georgetown has that good opportunity for me to network with my own, classmates and, batchmates who may not be undertaking arbitration as a specialized course, but because they are part of the Georgetown alumni community, eventually, that would really help me in the longer run. So these are a couple of reasons why, when someone is also picking about NLU versus non-NLU or a Jindal versus non-NLU school, they would be weighing in such factors. And I know many other, graduates who have just given CLAT or, who are just trying to give CLAT, think about these factors. So I think you're spot on about it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Now, this is also a personal question that I always wanted to ask. Unlike several candidates who pursue their foreign master degree right after their undergrad studies, you gave a 2-year gap between your undergrad and your foreign. Was this deliberate, or what advice would you give to prospective students on this particular aspect?
Well, I was, but not for COVID. I was actually supposed to go to Georgetown immediately after my undergrad. I think I would have done a serious mistake if I had done so. I'm so glad that I spoke to many of my mentors, and many of them whom I actually now call them as mentors. But when I reached out to them, it was cold messaging on LinkedIn or cold emailing for alumni of those particular schools. And I wanted to understand from them, how would one appreciate the course offering and the whole experience of, and the general advice that, look, work for a couple of years. It could be 3, it could be 4, it could be 5, it could be 2 as well. But, just 1 year of practice would not really, make you well prepared to undertake a course which is quite overwhelming, to be honest. At the same time, there's a lot more going on than just studying in an LLM course. So, which also means like, living abroad, making sure that everything falls in place, your job networking and many other factors which will make you more credible and legitimate. For all these reasons, I thought, taking a gap, makes more sense. But that being said, I'm not opposed to the idea of someone who wants to do LLM immediately. It's just that they need to know why they want to do it immediately. And if they have that clarity, because for me, it was more like a pure pressure, and because everybody else around me were applying for schools, and I thought now is a good time for me. I think that's a mistake. But if someone knows why they want to do LLM immediately, and for practice groups such as international arbitration, where work experience in their home country is quite well recognized as a prerequisite. It only makes sense to go and do your LLM and, first figure out why you want to do an LLM. And once you know why you want to do it, then the question is how long you can practice something closer to what you want to pursue as an LLM and next as a practice group. For example, litigation is that one proxy, you could say, for international arbitration, even though in litigation it would be much more broader and encompassing a lot more areas of practice. Though in international arbitration, you would either be picking on commercial disputes, either maritime or otherwise, or general contractual dispute. It could also be treaty-based disputes, which is what I was referring to as ISDS and public international law, or state-to-state disputes, which is also another form of resolution of disputes between states involving public international law concepts and principles. Or it could be sports arbitration, which is, as you may know about the ongoing Paris Olympics and other sports disputes going on around the world. So that way, I focused that, this is what I want to do. And I undertook a bunch of summer courses during the 2-year gap, and I think that was the way in which I could strengthen my profile, get more substantive learning of the subject. Because that way, when I'm doing my LLM, I'm not learning something for the first time, but more that I'm appreciating the concepts much more deeper, and I'm able to contribute to the class environment and, what the professor is also undertaking as either debates or peer discussions. So that's something that, I thought, doing courses in various arbitration institutions abroad, including, on international law at The Hague, made more sense for me when I was actually sitting in a class of public international law or arbitration at Georgetown. So that's something that, you may want to factor in. Of course, I took a couple of courses which I didn't really know existed as an experiment, but I would say, having that right blend of knowing certain courses already and to deep dive while you're doing your LLM, and some courses which you think are quite fascinating, also because of some professors who are uniquely positioned in certain universities, which will make you want to study under them.
Right. So you have been accepted into a variety of courses. Now, what is the secret sauce for crafting the perfect SOP, I would say? Because when I was applying to undergrad universities, SOP was a very important part of our entire application process. But it is also that makes one person stand out from all the others in the whole competitive run. So what specific elements or strategies help you to differentiate yourself from the others? Any tips that you could share, maybe?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I think this is where the biggest misconception is that, look, you need to have an agent or you have to go via someone who undertakes this on a professional scale, and, you have to just farm it out to them and they would do the job for you. I think that's where the originality is lost. Sure, you may take some help from people who have done this in the past, but you have to write your own, and then you may perhaps give it for a proofread or a second eye. But it's important that one puts in an effort to first understand why they want to pursue this particular school. And for that, you can undertake a lot more deeper understanding of, apart from courses that they offer, do they have any centers or organizations based? Do they have any leadership opportunities which you want to undertake? Are there any specific professors, who's undertaking a book project, or maybe who's writing on an interesting thesis, or maybe who's writing on something which is quite contemporary and you're relatable to that. So these are things that, you may want to discuss and, interlink with what you want to do in your short term versus long term, and how this school would materially help you, craft your journey. I think this is where I, used a lot more factors, such as I'd done a summer school in the University of Geneva, and it was easy for me to correlate some of the professors whom I had already, undertaken courses with, who also teach at MITS Geneva. And so it was quite easy for me to explain why exactly MITS Geneva makes more sense for me in terms of my practice domain. And at the same time, going back to, Georgetown, it was also easy for me to correlate to some of the professors whom I've been in touch somewhere the other way. And some of the professors at Georgetown are also adjunct practitioners. Rather, they're practitioners who serve as adjunct professors. So Having a practitioner who, come visit the school once in a week is a good way in which you can understand from their perspectives on various practice groups. And, these factors, if you can also explain in your SOP or your motivation letter, I think that would really stand out. But of course, many of the US schools take a holistic view of how a candidate is well placed to study in their school, and they just don't look at, your grades, but they look at your extracurricular activities, your leadership skills, your ability to, start something new. So they're looking at your entrepreneurial skills and your innovative ways of going about things. So if you have started a new venture, it could be as simpler as, a podcast. I think mentioning all these things are quite important for someone who sits in the admissions office. And I can say this because I was serving as the ambassador of Georgetown's admissions office. And I was invited to speak to, many prospective students, interested students, and those who are already admitted, but who would be starting next fall. And I could see the yardsticks or the factors that admissions office for various American schools look at. And many of them tend to be more holistic in terms of your overall personality, and having, the right, approach makes better sense. And there, I think, there's no secret sauce, but it's more of, how you would want to, use right language instead of showing off what you have done and not repeating what is already there in your CV, but rather to truly tell a story. Now, if you were to ask me, what did I do? I think that's more fairly simple to say than explaining what the secret sauce is. For me, it was more like I'd seen, my own native place in Karnataka, which had a lot more complications with the nearby factories and industries. And, I was trying to relate with the availability of international law to mitigate such a damage to the environment. So I undertook, a story of how I would want to undertake a course offering, which would perhaps help me to better understand whether this is a remediable harm or is it something that could be mitigated in different ways. So understanding what's going on around you in your life or perhaps in your profession. For some people, they actually get their calling perhaps while sitting and waiting for their, case to be called in a court. And, drawing things from your own practice or what you see around makes you a good opening statement in your SOP. And, and you conclude with why, important it is for you now makes more sense, because many people want to justify why now. I think justifying why now makes you stand out better from other candidates as well.
I agree. I agree. When I was applying to the US, I mean, again, this was for the undergrad program. I enjoyed adding a little personal touch to my SOPs when I was
Yep.
applying to the US. It was important to take into consideration your own experiences and how this particular course could not just help you in a professional way, but also in a personal way. I enjoy how they look at a more holistic approach towards, why you want to be a part of this university. I generally did enjoy that process of writing an SOP. And I think, thank you for that advice. I would keep it into consideration when I'm applying for my own LLM. But focusing on an academic perspective, I lived abroad my entire life. So I could see a difference when it comes to the education system between Dubai and India, even though I was in a CBSE school over there. What was the educational experience for you between in India and the US? What difference did you experience with the teaching methods, the curriculum, the overall academic environment?
But by and large, many of the Indian schools, irrespective of what area of discipline is or the academic, mindset is, there is a huge pressure on thought-based studying. So where a professor comes and perhaps, delivers a lecture. I think US schools do that too. It's just that I think US schools also look at how students can contribute to the class. And that way, you're thrown into the deep, and, cold calling is very much a thing. And, when professor cold calls you and asks you to explain something, you would be wondering, why should I be doing? And if I've been enrolled into this program, I'm expected to be taught something. But rather, it's more like, how would you present your thoughts and ideas and what you learn? So of course, there is, as like any other abroad universities, US schools also give you good amount of readings before the class, and you understanding in your own language and, in your presentation would make it much more appealing for your other classmates as well to present it better. I think that way the peer pressure and the peer competition will make you present the same topic which the professor is talking about in a different context. I think that's the highlight that I could see from the thought-based learning in India versus self-paced learning with an opportunity to present your ideas, explain your concepts in your own language, in your own words. In addition to, you can also add, for example, I was given an opportunity to, or rather, I was cold called to talk something about the investor state dispute mechanism in India. And, that was a good opportunity for me to undertake everything that I knew and, contribute to the class. And these are ways in which, you could understand how to present something. And as a lawyer, you're always trying to tell a story. It could be for a judge, it could be for an arbitrator, or even if it means you're at a negotiating table and you want to convince somebody. So ability to explain something in a very, simple and understandable way is the job of a lawyer. And, that's something that, law schools in the US focus more. And I think they do a pretty good job. It need not be just for Georgetown, but for many of the schools. That being said, I think the one experience that stood out for me at Georgetown was also about the externship program, which you undertake in the spring semester, as I was telling you earlier. And that's where I think you can skip 2 credits worth of classes, and you can work at a law firm for 20 hours a week. And, it could be any of the law firms or any of the international organizations or think tanks, or it could be World Bank. And those are opportunities which I think, which will make you appreciate the courses as well. Because I'd taken some courses in the spring semester on investor state disputes, and I was already doing some arbitration work on actual cases at King and Spalding in Washington, D.C. So it was quite easy for me to correlate, understand what is it that I'm really missing and what I'm able to get, at the side by side at the law firm as well. And I was able to interact with my supervisor at the law firm and, learn more from his practice and take it back to the class where, something similar was also being discussed. So these things I think will make you, of course, what other universities in India offer as internships, but they're pretty much when you're in break. But I think what schools here, especially for LLM at Georgetown, offers you is that you do the externship while you're in the class. So of course you divide your time adequately. You don't miss your classes for that, but it's just that you miss you plan your schedule in such a way that you do your 20 hours per week. At the same time, you also undertake some good classes at Georgetown.
I think that's quite a wonderful way to independently explore your own interests and also learn from the externship and then apply it in classes. I think that's quite an innovative way to mix both the professional as well as the college life together. So I think that's quite an innovative idea.
Well, it could be hectic. It was hectic for me as well.
Right, definitely.
But that is how it is, Yeah, and you unless you undertake such opportunities side by side and you can handle the pressure. I'm not saying you have to give your all and not have any life outside of law, but just that you need to be well placed to manage your time and expectations. That way you would very much go ahead with that project.
Right. Now, in one of your LinkedIn posts, you had shared about a list of 250 events and where you spoke about various webinars and online lecture series, conferences during the lockdown period. I had also conducted a type of workshop during my lockdown period back at home, and I mean it wasn't as large as you had done it, but it was with around 20 to 25 children, and it was kind of a platform for everyone to come and speak up about their lockdown experiences, have fun, enjoy with games and things of that sort. However, with your lecture series, conferences and workshop, what was the intention behind doing this? What is the takeaway for the younger generation?
Well, I think that was more of a consolidation of information that was there all over the place. And, the reason why I curated that document was to, tell everyone that, look, there's so many things happening even during lockdown and you just need not be bored sitting at home, but you could very well, attend some events. It could be a networking event. It could be, more like a substantive learning. It could be a summer course, or it could be something that a law firm is organizing in collaboration with many other institutions. So the idea was to give information access to many people who did not have one, but at a consolidated place. So it was more like just putting things together so that anybody who wants to, watch this could, very well benefit from this. And the biggest takeaway for me personally was that, look, I'm doing something which would help somebody. If it may not be a lot of people, but it perhaps would help somebody. And, because of this, somebody would give me some other information. And, it did happen that way. So they said, okay, look, I see that, you're curating a list of events and conferences. You may want to add this also to the list. So I was able to, learn about something which I didn't know. So in a way, I'm trying to help somebody and somebody's also trying to help me. So that, goes both ways.
Right.
But the biggest takeaway for others, in doing something like this is, look, of course, everybody needs help. But unless you are in a position to offer help in whatever means and capacity that you can, it's just not fair to expect help from everybody all the time. So
True.
I think I'm a big believer of karma. And I think I thought, doing my bit, would also help me somewhere in the future. Even though I didn't really expect that person to help me out with, a couple of events and conferences, but that just happened as a byproduct.
Right. I think that's what makes you a LinkedIn influencer. Definitely.
Well, I'm flattered if you say so.
All right. So, if we could move on to a more professional experience, what are some of the challenges or the opportunities you have encountered while working in the international arbitration in the US?
Well, for one, I noticed that a lot more is dependent on what you already know about international arbitration. And there's no, scope to, learn something for the first time, but it's more of an application of what you've already learned and, you're trying to, fine tune it. For example, many of the briefs that I worked on, I didn't have an opportunity to learn something new on the law because I think that's what you are expected to learn in the law school or perhaps in your previous practice, because that's the level of intensity and fine tuning that's required when it goes in the final filing. But that being said, I also learned something very new and very interesting about witness handling and about witness statements. And by undertaking a couple of cross-examination courses and also being sitting in one of those where I could notice, I saw that cross-examinations are done which are on more spontaneity in terms of the delivery of questions and the way in which it is being assessed simultaneously. Because it's one person could be asking the question, and that person could be the lead cross examiner or the lead counsel for the team. But there is a batch of lawyers sitting, including other partners, it could be associates, who are thinking of possible ways in which the answers could, go both ways. And I see the collaborative effort, amongst the team every time there is a cross examination going on, and the way in which they, consult each other, the way they undertake and reframe their script, and the type of question that they're asking. So I see that as a big shift from what it is done in India. Sure, there could be a couple of law firms which also do a better cross examination, or even some senior advocates who do excellent cross examination. But I think here, the way in which they pass on the skill of cross examination from one to another is missing in India. I think someone in India does it very well, and that skill remains with somebody else. And the same person, may not have the time and energy to pass it on to somebody in a more effective way.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, they do it as well, but here I think they pass it on in a much more coherent way for
Right.
somebody who's also interested in the same skill set.
So the opportunities are better provided than they were in India for the passing on. Yeah, I understand.
Well, I think because this is more of a collaborative team effort,
Right.
and they realize that this is not something that you just have to keep it with one person,
Mm.
even though that person is an expert on it. It generally tends to being shared with others as well who are on the team. It could be a junior associate,
Mhm.
and associates are also given opportunities to cross-examine. If you just go on Exit's YouTube page and see some of the hearings which are recorded, you'll notice that many second year, third year, fourth year associates are given opportunities to cross-examine some
Wow,
of the fact witnesses
that's
or
amazing.
the quantum experts. So I think that's a good way in which some of the law firms demonstrate that they want to train a younger generation of practitioners and not just use them for billing purposes and for research and just for drafting. So I think that's a good way in which many of the US law firms, think and, progress their, younger practitioners.
Very true. It's all about bringing the younger generation who is at the end going to be representing you in the future to an equal footing and giving them the opportunity because every individual they might have it in them, but they're not able to show it because they're not given the opportunity to show that skills off. So I think that's quite comforting to hear yet again as a younger generation. That's quite an amazing experience, I would say. If we focus on the student, yeah, please.
No, I think on the same point, I think it's not just about younger generation, but also about diverse candidates,
Right.
especially those who may not have had the best exposure to graduate from the top schools, or who may not have been the same law firm for a long time, or someone who is and this applies for both racially diverse and also diverse in terms of their gender. And here I mean to say many of the candidates who are who perhaps may belong to LGBTQ community, or who could be women, they are being given some opportunities to make sure that the historical discrimination, or rather the preference, is ruled out. And there I think much more opportunities are now being shown, though there is a lot more work to be done.
Right.
I'm happy to see that there is work that is ongoing to make sure that male and female practitioners are given equal opportunities, if not better, to make sure that there is everybody gets a fair chance of standing out in the crowd. I think that's something that is becoming more a realistic issue, and people are taking good concern and care about it in making sure that everybody gets a fair share of opportunity.
That's amazing. I mean, every small step in the right direction is in entirety a step in the right direction. So I completely understand that. Now, if we're focusing on the students, what tips do you have for students to make the most out of their experience academically and professionally?
Well, I would want to say come with a plan, but at the same time, I would say come with an open mind, because what you will learn, perhaps, or or whom you may meet, will decide the course of your journey. So make sure that you both have a plan in place as to why you want to do this, what you want to do in the future. At the same time, have an open mind to opportunities. For example, somewhere down after my LLM, I realized that, look, I should have done perhaps some course on white collar crime or anti-corruption, because white collar investigations practice is like pretty big in the US. And I wish I had some experience back in India on this. So if I had that open mind, all throughout, perhaps I could have ventured into that, in addition to my extreme interest in international dispute resolution. So that's the mindset that I would want any youngsters or any practitioner who wants to do an LM at some point in time to have. But at the same time, make sure that you put in the best effort, because it could be overwhelming, and you may realize that, look, I used to put in a lot more hours during practice, and I'm supposed to do even now. But LLM is also quite overwhelming in terms of its course readings and about other things. So make sure that you pace your timing well. It's all about time management.
Yeah.
And once you're able to get a grasp of it, you're able to master it very well.
Okay. Being a third generation lawyer, what advice would you have for professionals who are starting their careers but don't have any family background when it comes to law? Does that affect your practice in any way or your professional experience in any way?
Well, again, a controversial question for me, but my answer would be quite simple for you. Look, sure, there is an advantage coming out from family of lawyers, because you see and you get inspired, and it's good for you. But there are many people who may not really get the same opportunities that way. But one thing that needs to be said, and it needs to be understood as well, is that anyone who's in the next set of generations but comes from a family of lawyers, I think there is even more pressure on someone who's entering into that profession from the family, because obviously there is doyens, or there's a good name that has already been established, and you need to live up to their expectations. And I think this is where I think I took some comfort and some inspiration in my own father, who turned out to be a criminal lawyer, even though his father happened to be a civil lawyer. And I'm not doing either of them. And it's not like, I got any of the, clientele or good blessings in terms of, professional expertise from, either of my father or my grandfather. But at least I took inspiration that, look, this is what it takes to be in the legal profession.
Right.
So I'm grateful for that opportunity. But at the same time, because I'm doing arbitration, which is completely alien, which was actually not approved by my father at some point in time.
It's your own journey.
It's my own journey. And, you need to craft out your own. And, if you happen to get help, through your family or friends or relatives, or it could be from your own classmates at law school, that's still good help. And don't away good help if it comes your way. But if you don't have one, make sure that you have means to approach them and get them at some point in time.
Yeah.
But I think it's still an unfair advantage, but it's all about how you make best use of the advantage.
Exactly. I mean, they would help you start your journey, but at the end of the day, you're the one who had to continue it and then pursue something completely different, completely new, and continue on that path as well. So, a slight advantage might be in the very beginning of your legal journey, but at the end of the day, you're still doing everything on your own. So, at some point, it does end up being in an equal footing, I think, both ways.
Well, it depends on how interested a candidate is, right?
Exactly.
If one thinks that, look, everything is made set for me and I don't have to work hard,
Mhm.
then you're just not utilizing what is being given to you as a gift. If you were to like make the best use of it, sure, that would be start of something very new. And you could see that in many law firms, many of the old law firms, which have a very good, interesting succession plan, or some of the other senior advocates who have seen the next generation also become senior advocates. So it's all about how one puts in that effort and wants to be as successful as the previous generation.
Mhm.
So at that, I would perhaps conclude on that debate, but I think it's still quite relevant because I've seen many practitioners entering into this profession and who may not really have any such intrinsic help, but at the same time, who carve out their own niche and still make it big.
Right.
So I still don't see why that's not a possibility. It's just that, sure, in the initial days, as you said, it could be harder to navigate through the process.
Yeah. So, okay, now we have reached the end of our podcast. So, here's my final question to you. You have been a podcast interviewer in the capacity of the young ITA mentee. How did it feel being on the receiving end of the questions instead of the one who was asking them?
Well, it's quite fascinating because I also gave it a lot more thought while I was framing questions while interviewing somebody. At the same time, I could see the free flow of conversation, which will make you pick up on something that was said, which could be eye catchy or controversial. At the same time, it's a skill set in altogether. And I think now that you're asking questions to me and I'm being asked to answer them, it makes me retrospectively think how well I could, frame a question. I think this also goes to a very good skill set of being a lawyer.
Mhm.
You need to ask questions. And I think, asking questions and answering questions is part of our profession. And I think it was quite an insightful journey for me as the podcast interviewer. And I still think, I would very much undertake to do that at some point of time again. But even this discussion, I think it's important to have candid conversations like this. At the same time, bring out what's helpful for the next set of people who want to perhaps listen to this interview. So I'm happy to be in this process, and thanks once again for your kind invitation.
Of course, of course. So thank you so much, sir, for sharing your valuable insights and experiences with us. It's been a genuine pleasure to learn from your journey and expertise, especially in the international law and dispute resolution field. To our listeners, we appreciate you for tuning in, and we hope you found today's conversation as enlightening as we did. Stay tuned for more discussions with industry experts, and until next time, thank you for your continued support.